Dr. Elias Carter had seen his fair share of battlefield horrors, but even he had to admit this was a mess. The emergency triage zone was nothing more than a scorched clearing between two wrecked transport ships, the air thick with acrid smoke and the stench of burned metal. Wounded soldiers, human and alien alike, lay in makeshift medical tents, waiting for help that was running out. Supplies were dwindling, and the Zarkash, a particularly nasty brand of hostile exoskeletal brutes, weren't in the habit of letting survivors retreat. Carter pressed a blood-soaked bandage against the thigh of his latest patient, a human soldier too delirious to flinch. "Rourke, tell me you've got evac inbound," he barked without looking up. Commander Rourke, standing just outside the tent, barely spared him a glance. "Still waiting on confirmation. You're doing great. Document. I swear to every medical deity, if you're just saying that to keep me from screaming, I will throw a scalpel at you." "Wouldn't dream of it," Rourke deadpanned, then turned as another soldier rushed up to him with a datapad. The commander's scarred face darkened. Carter would have asked what was wrong, but at that moment, a new patient was carried into his tent, her small frame limp in the arms of two human medics. Vera, a young Ilari girl, barely past adolescence, her silver skin now streaked with blood and dust. Carter's stomach clenched. The Ilari weren't built for war. Their kind were diplomats, scholars, artists, fragile in a way that made humans instinctively want to shield them. Yet here she was, another casualty of the Zarkash onslaught. He ran a practiced eye over injuries and grimaced. Her left leg was crushed, the bone, if that was what her species called it, shattered beyond repair. Deep lacerations ran along her thigh, the tissue already darkening in a way that suggested necrosis. One of the human medics, a young woman with a streak of oil on her cheek, hesitated before speaking. "Sir, the Lari don't do amputations." Carter already knew that. He'd worked with them long enough to understand the deep-rooted cultural taboo. To the Ilari, a missing limb was more than a disability. It was a severance of self, a fate worse than death. He set his jaw. "Then they're about to hate me, because if we don't cut it off, she's dead." Vera stirred weakly, her golden eyes fluttering open. "No, please." Her voice was hoarse, her body trembling. Carter softened his tone. "Vera, listen to me. If I don't do this, the infection will kill you. I can't save the leg, but I can save you." She let out a choked noise, halfway between a sob and a plea. I'll be nothing. My people—" "Your people need you alive," Carter interrupted, gripping her hand. "We'll figure out the rest later. But right now I need you to trust me." Tears welled in her eyes, but after a long, shuddering breath, she gave the smallest nod. Carter exhaled and turned to his team. "Scalpel. Now." The medics moved with sharp efficiency, but just as Carter prepared to make the first incision, a new voice cut through the tension. "Stop." Carter turned to find Elder Tanis, one of the senior Ilari diplomats, standing at the tent entrance, his pale robe stained with ash. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze burned with disapproval. "This is a violation of our customs," Tani said coldly. She would rather pass with dignity than live as a broken thing. Carter tightened his grip on the scalpel. "She's not a thing, and she's sure as hell not broken." Tani stepped forward, his posture rigid. "You do not understand our ways, human. What you see as salvation, we see as destruction of the soul. If you amputate that limb, you will doom her to exile. She will never be whole again." Carter met his gaze, unflinching. "She'll be alive." A heavy silence fell. Rourke shifted slightly, hand hovering near his sidearm in case this conversation went from philosophical to physical. Finally, Tanis exhaled, his expression weary. "I cannot stop you, but understand, she will never be one of us again." Carter looked down at Vera. Her lip trembled, but she squeezed his hand, a silent, desperate answer. That was all he needed. "I'm saving your life," he whispered, then brought the scalpel down. The surgery was brutal, quick, and efficient. There was no luxury of painkillers strong enough for this kind of operation under field conditions. Only Carter's steady hands and Vera's stifled cries. His team worked with quiet urgency, sealing rupture vessels and clearing necrotic tissue, until finally, the ruined limb was gone. Vera lay limp, her breathing shallow but steady. Carter wiped the sweat from his brow, exhaustion settling in his bones. "She's stable," he announced. "For now." Rourke exhaled. "Good, because we have another problem." He tossed a battered comm unit onto the supply table. "Zarkash scouts just found our position. We're out of time." Carter stared at the device, then at the unconscious girl on the table. He had saved her life. Now, he had to make sure it wasn't for nothing. The Zarkash were coming. Commander Rourke's voice crackled over the camp's comms, his tone sharp and urgent. "All units, prepare for evac. We got incoming hostiles. ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Not enough time to run, barely enough to fight." Dr. Elias Carter wiped his hands on his already blood-stained uniform and glanced down at Vera, still unconscious on the makeshift operating table. Her silver skin was pale, almost translucent under the harsh field lights. The stump of her leg had been wrapped in sterile bandages, but she was far from safe. Without a permanent solution, without a replacement, she was vulnerable. And according to her people, she was already lost. "Not on my watch." Carter turned to Hawthorne, the squad's designated engineer, or, as some prefer to call him, a walking disaster in a tool belt. "Tell me you got something." Hawthorne pushed up his welding goggles, revealing the gleam of pure, reckless enthusiasm in his eyes. "Oh, I got something. It's just that something might explode, or malfunction, or possibly turn her into a minor deity, depending on how the wiring shakes out." Carter gave him a deadpan look. "Not helpful. Depends on your definition." Lieutenant Das, ever the calm problem solver, interrupted before Carter could strangle their resident tinkerer. "Hawthorne, focus. We need a functioning cybernetic limb, not an experimental death trap." Hawthorne held up his hands in surrender. Fine. I can jury-rig something from our exosuit components, but the problem is Vera's biology. We don't have a single cybernetic part designed for Ilari physiology. Her nerve endings aren't even mapped like ours." Carter crossed his arms. "So what you're telling me is that she might reject anything we attach?" Hawthorne hesitated. "More like, her body might try to integrate it in a way we don't expect. Could be good, could be catastrophic. Either way, we won't know until we try." Carter exhaled slowly. "And we have 15 minutes to figure it out." A distant explosion rumbled to the ground, punctuating his words. Triage was over. Now it was survival. The interior of the battered dropship served as their impromptu workshop. Das and Rourke coordinated defense plans outside, leaving Carter and Hawthorne to work. Vera stirred as Carter injected a mild stimulant into her arm. Her golden eyes fluttered open, hazy with pain, before they landed on him. "Doctor?" Carter gave her a tight smile. "Still here, kid." She shifted slightly, and then realization. Her body went rigid, her breath caught, and she looked down. She didn't scream. She just stared at the empty space where her leg had been. "It's gone." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the devastation in it was unmistakable. Carter crouched beside her, his expression softening. "Yeah, it is." A long silence. Then, barely audible, "What am I now?" He hated that question. "Alive," he said simply. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "My people, they won't." She couldn't finish the thought. Carter glanced at Hawthorne, who was soldering something together with reckless precision. "That's why we're giving you something better." Vera frowned, confused, as Hawthorne turned toward her, holding up what could generously be called a prototype. It was ugly, cobbled together from exosuit hydraulics, drone servos, and whatever wiring had been fried in the last firefight. The plating was mismatched, the joints exposed. It looked less like a leg and more like a chaotic tangle of machinery given shape at the last second. Vera blinked. "That's supposed to be my leg?" Hawthorne grinned. "It'll be great. Probably. There's a slight chance it might overload your nervous system and cause spontaneous combustion. But that's only happened once." Carter pinched the bridge of his nose. Hawthorne stopped talking. Hawthorne shrugged. "Look, it's not pretty, but it'll work." Probably better than the ones your people make, considering they don't believe in them. Vera hesitated, staring at the cybernetic limb as though it might bite her. What if it doesn't work? Carter met her gaze, steady and unwavering. Then we try again. She swallowed hard. Then, slowly, she nodded. Do it. The integration process was a disaster. Not medically. Carter handled that part fine. The nerve connection was stable, the attachment secured. But when Hawthorne booted up the limb, Vera immediately shot up 2 meters into the air and crashed into the bulkhead. Ow! Carter whirled on Hawthorne. What did you do? Hawthorne waved a hand dismissively. Oh, relax. It's just a calibration issue. Vera groaned from the floor. I hate everything. Bang. The dropship rocked as something exploded outside. Das's voice crackled over comms. We're out of time. Zarkash assault squads inbound. Prepare for combat. Carter turned back to Vera. Can you stand? She gritted her teeth and forced herself up, the cybernetic leg whirred as she adjusted, her body struggling to balance. And then she took a step, then another. Then she turned, staring at her new limb, wonder flickering behind her exhaustion. Carter raised an eyebrow. How's it feel? Vera exhaled shakily. Then, to his surprise, she grinned. Strong. Outside, gunfire erupted. Hawthorne clapped his hands. Well, guess we find out if it works in real combat. Carter groaned. I hate my life. Rourke's voice rang through the comms. Everyone move. It's time to break out of here. Carter turned back to Vera. You up for this? She flexed her new leg, then met his gaze with fire in her eyes. Let's find out. And with that, they ran into the fire. The Zarkash didn't hesitate. They swarmed from the tree-line in a mass of chitin and death, their exoskeletal frames gleaming in the firelight. Plasma bolts screeched through the air, scorching the already ruined battlefield as a human and Alari survivors scrambled for cover. Dr. Elias Carter wasn't a soldier, but Ward didn't care. He gritted his teeth and pulled Vera into the dropship's cargo hold as return fire erupted from Commander Rourke's team. The Zarkash were closing fast, and the safe window for evacuation was narrowing by the second. Das, tell me you have an exit plan. Carter snapped into his comm. Lieutenant Das's voice came back clipped but calm. Working on it. Would be easier if we weren't being actively murdered. Noted. Carter turned to Vera. Her cybernetic leg hummed softly, adjusting with each shift of her weight. She was still testing it, still adjusting, but they had no more time for trial runs. How's it holding up, he asked. She flexed a joint, eyes flickering between awe and apprehension. Strange. Fast. But good. Hawthorne, crouched behind a supply crate, grinned as he shoved another power cell into his modified pulse rifle. I make the best legs in the galaxy. Carter scowled. This isn't the time for... Vera moved. One moment she was beside him. The next, she was gone, a silver blur streaking past. She launched herself over a barrier, her new limb absorbing the shock like it was nothing, and slammed into an advancing Zarkash soldier. The alien barely had time to register what had happened before she drove her weapon into its carapace, wrenching it free with a sickening crunch. Carter blinked. Well, that's new. Rourke, crouched beside him, let out a low whistle. Remind me to get one of those legs. Hawthorne preened. Told you. Then the Zarkash broke through. A towering brute lunged at them, plasma rifle raised. Carter dove aside as the shot vaporized the space where he'd been standing. Rourke fired back, his rifle punching a hole through the alien side. But more were coming. Too many. Das! Rourke barked. Where the hell is my exit? 2 clicks north, Das replied. But we need to clear a path, unless you want to be vaporized mid-flight. Carter swore. We don't have 2 clicks. We barely have 2 minutes. Rourke's jaw tightened. Then we improvise. The improvisation turned out to be Hawthorne's absolute worst idea yet. We overload the ship's reactor, he said cheerfully. Carter stared at him. That is the opposite of helpful. Hawthorne rolled his eyes. Not an actual explosion, just enough to fry their scanners and give us a window. Call it controlled EMP blast. Rourke's expression was dubious. Controlled? Theoretically. Das's voice crackled through the comms. Do it. Carter exhaled sharply. We're all going to die. Not necessarily. Hawthorne said brightly. Now, somebody stall those walking nightmares while I... A Zarkash warrior dropped into the ship behind them. Vera reacted first. She pivoted, her cybernetic limb propelling her forward with terrifying speed. Her foot connected with the alien's chest, sending it flying into a bulkhead hard enough to dent metal. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Vera looked at her leg. I did not mean to kick that hard. Hawthorne grinned like a lunatic. You're welcome. Carter groaned. Just set up the damn EMP. Outside, the battle raged. Rourke led the charge, covering Das and the remaining troops as they fought toward the extraction point. But the Zarkash were relentless, adapting to every maneuver, pushing the humans and Ilari back with sheer numbers. They were going to be overwhelmed. Then the dropship shook with an electric hum. Hawthorne's voice cackled through the comms. EMP firing in 3, 2, 1. A wave of energy burst outward from the ship, crackling like a living storm. Zarkash warriors staggered as their weapons shorted out, their targeting systems failing in an instant. The battlefield plunged into chaos. It was the opening they needed. Go! Rourke bellowed. The team sprinted for the evac zone. Vera stayed close to Carter, adjusting quickly to the cybernetic limb, using it to outmaneuver the Zarkash in ways she never could before. And for the first time since waking up without her real leg, she wasn't afraid. They reached the evac point in a whirlwind of gunfire and burning sky. The extraction ship hovered overhead, its bay doors wide open, but the final stretch was still crawling with Zarkash. Das called from the ramp. We need to move now. Rourke and Carter exchanged a glance. There was no way they'd all get through in one sprint. Someone had to clear the way. Carter barely had time to register the decision before Vera moved. She launched herself forward, using her cybernetic limb to propel her into the enemy ranks with breathtaking speed. She wasn't just faster, she was something else entirely. A flickering, untouchable force, weaving through the Zarkash, striking and evading in equal measure. Carter's breath caught. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. The battle ended with fire and sky. The humans and Ilari made it aboard the evac ship, lifting off just as the Zarkash recovered. Below, the battlefield burned, but they were alive. They had won. Carter collapsed against the bulkhead, exhaustion dragging at every muscle. Vera sat across from him, breathing hard, her new leg sparking faintly. She looked at him, gold eyes searching. You were right, she said softly. I'm not broken. Carter managed a tired grin. No, kid, you never were. Hawthorne, still lying flat on his back, lifted a hand weakly. Also, I am a genius. Das nudged him with a boot. Shut up. Vera looked down at her cybernetic limb. She flexed her foot, testing the motion, and then she smiled. For the first time since the amputation, she wasn't thinking about what she had lost. She was thinking about what came next, and that, Carter thought, was what made humanity different. They didn't just endure. They adapted. The med bay of the evac ship smelled like antiseptic and scorched metal, the air still heavy with the echoes of battle. Dr. Elias Carter ran a scanner over Vera's leg, watching the data scroll across a screen. The cybernetic limb had held up better than expected. No system failures, no catastrophic nerve rejections. If anything, her body was adapting to it faster than he'd anticipated. She sat on the exam table, flexing her foot experimentally. It still feels strange, she admitted. Like a part of me, but also not. Carter nodded. That's normal. The connection will stabilize with time. She studied the limb in silence, her silver fingers tracing the mismatched plating. My people won't accept this. He set the scanner aside. Do you? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she hopped down from the table, too fast, too fluid. The motion was effortless. Carter raised an eyebrow. You're adjusting quickly. Vera hesitated. then took a step back, another, then, in one smooth motion, she pivoted and launched herself into a perfect mid-air flip, landing without so much as a stumble. Carter blinked. That was unnecessary. Hawthorne, watching from across the room, whistled. That was awesome. Vera looked at her leg, then at Carter, and this time, her expression held something new. Excitement. This isn't just a replacement. Her voice was quiet, reverent. It's something else. Carter crossed his arms. Yeah, it is. She exhaled slowly. The Ilari think I'm lost. Broken. She glanced down at the metal limb. But this isn't broken, is it? Carter shook his head. No, it's just different. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. I never thought different could be better. Hawthorne leaned against the wall, arms crossed. That's the thing about humans, he said, grinning. We don't just fix things. We improve them. The ship's briefing hall was packed. Human officers and Ilari diplomats sat in tense silence as Elder Tanis took the floor. The Elder's silver robes were immaculate, his expression carefully schooled, but Carter knew disapproval when he saw it. Dr. Carter, Tanis began, his voice smooth but edged. You interfere with one of our own. Carter didn't flinch. I saved her life. Tanis ignored the interruption. You replace an essential part of her being with a machine. Do you have any idea what that means to us? Carter leaned forward. Do you have any idea what it means to her? Tanis' expression flickered, but he recovered. She is Ilari. Her fate is not yours to decide. She already decided. A new voice cut through the room. Vera stepped forward. Her cybernetic leg gleamed under the artificial lighting, a stark contrast to her organic form. Whispers rippled through the assembled Ilari as she moved, not with caution, not with shame, but with confidence. She faced Tanis without hesitation. I am still Ilari. Tanis' expression remained impassive. You are altered. Vera didn't back down. Then maybe alteration isn't death. A murmur swept through the hall. Tanis regarded her for a long moment. You believe this is a gift. She lifted her chin. I believe it's a choice. Silence stretched between them. Then, without another word, Tanis turned and left the room. The observation deck was quiet. Vera stood by the viewport, watching the stars streak past. Carter stepped up beside her, the hum of the ship's engines filling the silence between them. Finally, she spoke. He won't change overnight. Carter sighed. No, but someone has to start the conversation. She turned to him. So what now? He smirked. Now we keep moving forward. She exhaled softly. Then, for the first time in days, she smiled. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready.